Welcome to Campfire Conversations. I'm Jeremy Litchfield. Before microphones and media, we had fire. It was the first circle and the first stage. It's where people gathered to connect. This podcast returns to that circle. These aren't interviews, they're heart-centered conversations where love and fear both have space to show up. Campfire Conversations is part of my Heartstrong adventure, a journey exploring where love and fear show up in our world, especially in the lives of men, and how freeing men from fear helps heal individuals, communities, and systems. These conversations aren't about providing answers. If anything, they bring up more questions. My hope is that what you hear makes you think differently, see things from a different angle, and maybe even sparks a conversation that leads to a breakthrough for you or someone you share it with. In this conversation, I'm sitting down with Kharma Amos. Kharma came out as a lesbian in Tulsa, Oklahoma in 1990. She was 18 years old. It wasn't the most accepting place or time. Her entry into adulthood was one of resistance to hate, resistance to systems that told her she was wrong, sinful, and less than. That resistance shaped everything that followed. A call to ministry, a decade serving in a queer context, years of denominational work, and eventually a beautiful landing at the Unitarian Universalist Church in Brunswick, Maine, where she now leads with a theology built on one foundation: love. What we talked about in this conversation goes deeper than identity or faith. We talked about queering as a verb, about deconstructing the normative frameworks that aren't serving us, about the fear that keeps us inside rigid beliefs, and what happens when we start pulling out pieces of that Jenga tower, about the violence of perfectionism and the terror of not being loved if we're imperfect, and about why centering love means asking not just what's loving, but for whom. We sat around a fire in my backyard. We talked for over an hour. What emerged is a conversation about choosing love over fear, not as sentiment, but as practice. About the radical work of staying proximate, even when it's hard. If this work resonates with you, I would love your support. The best way to do that is to like, subscribe, and share this podcast with someone who might need to hear it. These conversations matter, and your support helps them reach more people. Now, let's go to the fire. Kharma, thank you so much for joining me in my yard and sitting down to have a conversation. I think this is one of the conversations when I first started I was really looking forward to have with you, because I'm just so impressed with how not only the energy I feel like you bring to the church in Brunswick, but the way that love is so centered in every reflection that you give. So just really excited to sit down and have this conversation. And I guess as a starting point, what I'd love to hear is, so here we are sitting in our yard around a fire. And I always and this doesn't have to be like a bio or anything, but what are some of the things that are, I think, most critical in your life that brought you to this moment? Here we are, but ready to talk about love and fear and all those things. And, what are some of the things that brought you here?
Yeah. First, thanks for the invitation. I've been so fascinated with your adventure, your Heartstrong adventure, and we've had a couple of conversations that seem so well aligned with current movements inside Unitarian Universalism. I will back up, though. I think that's a really interesting question because we're all formed by our life experiences. My mother was 15 years old when I was born. I grew up in a context of poverty. She quit school at 9th grade. I was the first person in my family to go to college. I came out as a lesbian at the age of 18 in Tulsa, Oklahoma, which wasn't the most accepting. That was around 1990. And so my entry into adulthood was one of resistance to hate, of me and people like me being discriminated against in various ways at that particular time in history. And so when I first felt a vocational call to ministry, it was in a context of wanting to show up with love in the world in resistance to that which takes life away, or others, people who are marginalized. That's how I spent my life. I'm in Maine because over the years, and I served primarily in a queer context, and I served as a local church pastor for 10 years. in a queer context. And then I did denominational work with people who were going into ministry for many of the same reasons that I had. But I was probably always a Unitarian Universalist theologically. And I say that this is important because universalism, the history of universalism, is about love, about if there's anything sacred, it's about love. And there are none of us outside the grasp of that. So it took many years, but I sort of came into Unitarian Universalism trying to find more alignment and integrity with how my theology was evolving and the work that I was doing. And I fell in love with this lovely little church in Brunswick. And I feel like it's been the best decision I've made to be doing the kind of work in a community like the one that I serve now. I'm profoundly grateful.
Yeah. No, it's interesting when you said, I feel like I've always been a Unitarian Universalist. When you said that, I'm like, oh, me too. And I was raised at a Congregationalist church. It was I would say very liberal, especially for the times. I think I stopped consistently going to church when I was pretty young, but I can remember I would go on holidays and stuff. And at one point we had a gay minister for a small town in Maine, which was very, very rare. And, but that form of religion never made sense to me. I just like, it just never made sense to me. And I think I may have told you when I met Becca, my wife, she had invited me to go to church with her one Sunday. And my reaction was, uh-oh, I don't think this one is going to work out. Because I was just so skeptical of organized religion. It wasn't that far since, it was a good few years since 9/11 had happened, but that just made me really skeptical of organized religion. And then, and I went with her, and it was the UU Church in Northwest DC, in Washington, DC. And I was like, oh, this isn't church. This isn't religion. This is spirituality. And I was like, I get all this. And I kind of got hooked from there. And so it's interesting. We have that same, in some ways, same story. But, you said something in there where you said you were mainly serving in a queer context.
Right.
I'd love to hear because I've never heard you say that. And I just love to hear what that entails.
Sure. So I was called into ministry in metropolitan community churches, which is a denomination that's global. That was started in 1968 by a Pentecostal preacher named Troy Perry, who was kicked out of his church for being gay. And he moved to Los Angeles in 1968. This was before the Stonewall Rebellion. And he started a church in his living room in Huntington Park. And the origin stories are kind of interesting. But it very quickly it spread within a year to Australia and to some other places around the world. And it was pretty novel at the time to have a group focused on a liberating message for queer people, that you aren't sinful, you are loved. You are loved as you are without having to change anything about yourself. And so predominantly the congregations that I attended before I went to seminary and the one that I served, I'd say 80% of the people identified in some way as queer based on their sexuality or gender. And now I would say that's flipped in the community that I serve.
Yeah. And one question on that, because I had an interesting conversation with someone recently, and it was around money. It was one of these recorded conversations, but the conversation ended with him saying, I use this word and I hope I am not offending anyone. But he's saying, as I look at the world now, a lot of what we need to do, he's like, I really like using the word queer as a verb. He's like, we need to queer things.
Yeah.
We need to queer capitalism. And I was like, that's really interesting. Because I was like, when I look at the roots of the word queer, my definition of it is just like, you are living your true essence, your true self, without concern for how other people view you, right? You are fully kind of embracing yourself in living your true essence. And that often gets in the big area where that comes up, obviously, is within sexual orientation, gender identity, because there are such strict cultural norms around what that should be. And for me, that was like, I don't know, it just flipped a switch onto me, and it just became this amazing orientation towards that word, in the sense of having so much more pride having so much more pride in the people who are using that word.
Yeah.
Because it's like, you know what, society says I shouldn't do this, but I just need to, and not being trapped in these kind of cultural boxes.
Mm-hmm.
And so and I'll go beyond this, but I'd love to hear from your perspective within the queer community of the usage of that word. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think that is offensive to people, or is it like something where it's like getting back to the essence of why it's being used?
Yeah. I love that question. It's as if you were planted. So I spent the whole first chapter of my doctoral thesis is defining the word queer.
Oh, wait, stop it.
I'm serious. Yeah, I'll send it to you later.
Oh my God.
And the title is Queering Church. And here's,
oh my God.
Right. And to me, so the word has evolved and means different things in different contexts, but my verb is my favorite way. And it really is about deconstructing normative framework.
Yeah.
And so I'll give an example. My mom, probably mostly straight, like most of her experience is straight. She's queerer than some white gay men who are rich and married and live in a nice house on the corner.
Yes.
Because she deconstructs normative frameworks. And so not only was my context queer in the sense that GLBT people were there, but we celebrated Leather Sunday, and there were we blessed polyamorous unions and talked about other ways to be loving and in relationship and covenantal that aren't about state-sponsored marriage. It's none of those things. So and so my question is, okay, if queerness is powerful, and it has been in my life, to be able to deconstruct all the inheritance, hang on to what's good, and maybe question the stuff and leave it behind if it's no longer serving. So if that's true, my question that I went into my study wondering was, well, if we're a queer congregation, what does that mean about how we run a board meeting? Does that mean we throw Robert's rules out the window and think about more liberative models of how we are in relationship, or how we make decisions, or how we discern, how we show up for each other? So how does queering church have some kind of intentional impact on what programming we offer, and how we pay people, and how we hire them? And like, you know what I mean? Like, it shouldn't just be, I used to get I would roll my eyes at folks who were like working for marriage equality, which I think is a good thing, but only to change out the characters on the top of the wedding cake. Like nothing else about traditional marriage was questioned at all. Yeah. But you could see you got me passionate there. So
yeah. Yes.
Might have been a tangent.
No, oh my gosh. I love that, because when I have been thinking since that conversation a couple of weeks ago, because I remember one night sitting around with Becca and saying, Becca, so many people try to live life just fitting in. I've been trying to live my whole life just trying to fit out. And it's people may look at me and be like, well, you're a guy, you look like I'm like, no, yes, but I always felt a little bit out of place, but not in a way where I wasn't accepted. It was just, I always felt a little bit different. And then, and that conversation is like, I was like, I might be a little bit queer in the sense of like, I'm just a little bit off kilter, a little bit off center. And I was like, but I like that. And I love what you said about your mom. She may be queerer than and it just goes back to everything. It's like everything's on a spectrum, right? It's like you're not queer, you're not. It's like,
how queer are you?
Yeah, right? Yeah. I love that. And even shifting this over, and I think one of the things that I love about where being part of the UU community is that there's the 6 values, and I love the whole jet pig, but at the center of that is love. Right. Love is at the center of everything. And so I guess my first question is, from your perspective, you're leading a congregation where we're trying to center love in everything we do. And we're doing it in a town that, for the most parts, is incredibly kind of, I would say, progressive and pretty liberal. How do you actually view and define love, if you can even put words on what love is?
I wish I'd done some homework on this question. It is both definable and mysterious to me. It's like can you define pornography? Well, I know it when I see it.
Right.
I grew up, my first language of faith was Christian.
Yeah.
So I grew up with the simple definition that God is love, and whatever is loving is also sacred. I still buy that, not that I buy necessarily the notions of God that I had before. But what I mean by that is love is the thing that moves us towards connection, towards care, towards reciprocity and mutuality and solidarity and all those things that are about, for me, the point of life. So figuring out how to embody love is a lifelong quest.
And it's almost interesting because when you were talking about queering things, and it made me, and I've been thinking more recently, and I had a conversation, I told you before we started, with 6 men here on Sunday, and we were talking about what is love, how do we define love, how does love show up in our life. It was interesting. It was really hard to kind of put a definition on it. And there were a couple things that came up. And I brought this up. I don't know if you know who Simon Sinek is.
I don't.
He's just a thought leader, author, an amazing presenter. But I was listening to a podcast with him recently, and he's probably in his maybe early 40s. I don't know, somewhere I would say in his 40s, similar age frame as I am. But he was talking about how for so much of his life, he felt like a failure because he wasn't married and had never been married. And he'd go out on a date and someone would be like, "Oh, you were never married. Why?" Like, that was wrong. And his point was, as a society, we put so much emphasis on romantic love. And he's like, I have so many friendships. My life is filled with love from my friendships. And I just don't feel like I need that. If it comes, great, but I don't need it. One of the other things that came up in the conversation with the 6 men is one of them was a gay man. And he said, I think one of the things that complicates love for men, and it's so directly connected to sex. Sex is how you express love. So you have, like, culturally this focus so much on romantic love.
Yeah.
And the strong connection to sex. And he said, I think that is particularly from his observation, particularly from a context of cisgender heterosexual men, is what his observation was. And I could see that. And so it made me think of this idea of, like, it seems like as a society, we need to start queering love because we've created this very strict definition of it. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah.
How do we queer love? How do we make love truly reflective of what it is?
Yeah. Great question. I think there are multiple answers. I immediately go back in time to the worst time of the AIDS epidemic in the United States in queer community, and the creation of families of choice, and especially lesbians who stepped in to care for gay men when there had been a separation, really, of those communities. There were places, of course, where they met, but it was fairly polarized at that time. But when life happened, when sickness emerged, when people needed care, those things didn't matter anymore. And it's a queering of family, it's a queering of community, and it's a queering of love in the sense that there was a lot of sexuality-based shame around AIDS because as people were discovering how it's transmitted, etc. But love was liberated from just romantic and just sexual love.
Yeah.
In another example, in those years when people were afraid to visit or touch or drink after or be in the same room with someone who had HIV, folks from my church tradition showed up and put on the plastic suits and visited with people when they would, like, literally put plastic over their door and not let them have visitors. So, like, that was a queering of love to me. It's an embodied, like, example for me. I think about queer community now and the evolution of so many different identities. Like, I can't keep up with the flags that there are in queer community, but the evolution of an open talk about aromantic orientations, people who are just not into sexual romantic love, but who have rich love lives with their friends and community, with the art that they produce. Like there are so many other expressions of love.
Yeah. I think, and this is one thing that I just keep telling people and over again, because it's something that I feel and witness. But there's this researcher, Helen Fisher, who she passed away recently. And unfortunately, a lot of the research she was in didn't get fully finished. But she was researching love and had discovered that love isn't so much a emotion as it is a drive. It's almost like hunger or thirst, right? And that there are certain things that go on in our brain when we're experiencing love. Those same things are triggered when we're in nature. And so when you think about, as I think about love, there's certain things, and I think one of the most fundamental elements of love for me is connection.
Yeah.
And connection, yes, there's human connection. And you can feel connected to someone, and they don't have to be a romantic partner.
Right.
And you can love them. And there's connection to your art. There's connection to, when sometimes people say like, oh, I love that song. They actually might love that song because that song might actually create those same feelings that others get with romantic love, right? And, I think about all these things of how as a culture, we've just been so like, well, this is what love is. And this is where I think it starts to come into fear of where, and I know you're not an expert in this space and none of us are, but what have you observed around why people are so afraid to expand their definition of what love is and what love can?
Freedom is hard. If I observe people, like there's a fear of freedom for some folks, and to expand the definition.
Freedom of others or freedom of themselves?
For themselves. Freedom is sometimes harder when you can do whatever you want. Then you have to exercise discernment and make choices that you're then responsible for, rather than, okay, here's a rule set, please follow these rules, or here's what one does this is what life equals, and you go out and follow this path. To expand the definition of love, same thing that I experience when people are fearful of expanding the definition of God. If God is bigger than what I learned in my Presbyterian church growing up, then I might have to question all those other things too that I haven't questioned yet. Like, I'll use the metaphor of a Jenga. You question this thing and say, oh, I actually don't actually believe that God sends people to hell. That's a Jenga peg that comes out. Sometimes people are afraid. With faith, I'll make the jump. But with faith, if I start to question, it will all come crumbling down. And then what will I rely on? And I think it's a similar question. If love is, think about free love, whatever that brings up for you. But if then I'm actually responsible for making good choices on my own and not just doing what someone told me. I have to be more intentional. I have to think about it. That's frightening.
Yeah. It's interesting when you said freedom is harder, when you said, well, for the individual, it just made me think some of the work that Becca and I do has been around like strategy consulting. And we use a term often for structures that we help organizations develop. And we say freedom within a framework of, and if you take creative people, creatives, if you say to them, do something creative, they're just like, what does that mean? They want guardrails.
Yeah.
And I've never made that connection with strictly with humans and with the work, but it's interesting because we also personally take kind of some of the structures that we develop for people and we develop them for ourselves. And we say, here's our vision for the world we want to live in. Here's our purpose in pursuit of that vision. And here's kind of the guardrails we're gonna live by to make sure we're staying on track. And I guess for some, I think one of the challenges is a lot of people, I don't think, have done that work of that own self-reflection of setting up their own frameworks, and they're relying on culturally defined framework.
Right.
And, and one of the things I've always struggled with is, you'll hear these things and people will say, like, especially in the context of men, like, they're like, well, men got to do the work. And I just realized one time, it's like, we're saying that. Men don't know what the work is. They don't even know what that means, because in the context for men think the work could be like, well, you go to work, you get paid, you pound nails, you do these things. The idea of kind of looking at yourself internally, they don't even understand that concept, right? So I kind of went off on a little bit of a tangent there, but I think it is not just men, it's everyone, people who aren't willing to do that work. And I was thinking more recently about this idea of even the strongest held beliefs that I have. I think it's important in if I'm fully coming from a place of love, if I'm leading with love, this is my opinion, is I need to renew my vows with those beliefs every once in a while. And I'm not saying I'm changing it. I'm just saying I just need to look at that to see if that's serving me.
Yep.
I'd love to hear your thoughts on some of that, because that even means things on my beliefs around climate change, my beliefs around even the transgender athletes in sports and stuff like that. I just need to make sure that I'm not so set in my ways.
Yeah. I absolutely think that's right. I think I've been thinking about, this is a mixing of metaphors, but thinking about love at the center, which is the new articulation of Unitarian Universalist faith, what our faith is, trying to center love. That feels like a guardrail to me.
Yeah.
Like it's an inquiry. What is the most loving thing in this scenario? And where that relates to holding my viewpoints and my fiercely held opinions lightly, I had something to say about that. It'll come back to me. Is that question then gets to be followed for me is, for whom is this loving? If I think like, well, this is loving to the person that I care the most about, and who cares about that other person who's offended or feels left out, then I'm self-serving in my pursuit of love. So I'm pretty clear about a commitment to transgender people being able to have all the same access to sports and anything else that any binary gendered person would have. And I have conversations all the time with people who are vehemently opposed to my point of view. And there's no point is it loving for me just to walk away? If I said earlier, love is what turns us towards connection, it isn't. There's this tenacity of presence that's required if I really mean what I say about love and connection.
Yeah. But it's almost the idea of, and I'm hearing a little bit in this, and correct me if I'm putting words in your mouth, but you hold that thing, and that's a topic I was thinking about, I thought about for a while. And for a lot of the time, I was on the fence with it.
Yeah.
Because I was hearing really strong arguments on both sides. And I'm now in full support of transgender girls and women being able to play. I think because even when you start to look into it and you look at different hormone levels and I've done some deep dive on testosterone and understanding all that, there's a lot of complexity around that hormone, and you can't just, but I think one of the things that I've come to realize is that the importance of holding the idea that both things are true.
Yeah.
And you're right. I'm right. And if we can just understand that there's so much gray area here, then at least we don't have to be yelling at each other and hating on each other, and just recognizing, I totally see your point. I understand where you are coming from. I understand your perspective 100%. I'm also, when I hear stories about, like, especially in high school, because we're talking about such a limited number of athletes,
right?
It's just inconsequential. And when I hear stories and they're like, well, think about the girls who are losing the opportunities to have championships. And I was like, you know what? At every point in my career, when I had the opportunity to play against bigger, stronger boys and men, I always took that opportunity. Why? Because it made me better. And so I started thinking about the lessons we're learning. If the lessons we're teaching people is that the point is to win, then fine, you're right. But if the lessons we're teaching people is like, you can always be better because there's always going to be someone bigger and stronger than you, regardless of your context. So as opposed to basically viewing that person as competition against you, view that as competition for you.
Yes, absolutely. I think competition is at the root of so much of our,
and I should say
challenge.
Not competition.
Yeah. I don't know that competition's redeemable.
Yes, because like if they challenge you, that's a good thing.
And there's so much about human development and cooperation and learning how to be in community and make good decisions as a group. Like, it's not about the win. It's about the formation that takes place, or at least a big part of it is for me, what I hear. And I know I went to the State House and testified this past year on the 8 bills in Maine that were proposed. And I heard the impact on trans kids and the families of trans kids. And it's like, when being right about something becomes more important than the people who are harmed by the rhetoric, it feels like we've gone off the guardrails, right?
Yeah.
If we're not centering love, if we are heartless about the impact of that on actual people's lives, where it's not a theoretical argument for young trans kids in Brunswick who self-opt out of sports to avoid that, even though it's their favorite thing to do. Like, that breaks my heart.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, and then it goes back to the question you had, and I think is such a great question, is like, if love is at the center, for who?
Right.
And that's a challenging one because it becomes completely contextual. And, I was thinking, because one of the things that I'm always trying to view is in any given situation, I'm always like, how do I view this? How do I lead with love? Right. And it's like, but it needs to go beyond that. It's like, how do I lead for love for who? Because there are times, and someone just emailed me based on a post that I just did and shared a story of, after many years having to going through a divorce and loving their husband very much, all these things. And it's like, that's a hard thing to go through. And in that situation, I view that as this person is leading with love for themselves. And sometimes you need to do that.
Right.
And so how do we think about, in the context of the values of the UU Church?
Yeah.
Which I'm going to give myself a test: justice, equity, transformation, pluralism. It's not inclusive. Interdependence and generosity.
That's right. Yeah.
In the context of those values, how do I actually make sure that when I'm saying I'm coming from a place of love, it's not just love for myself, It's not just love for the people who are closest to me? That's a hard one.
It is. And I think that, at least in my way of thinking now, or I'm trying to lean in this direction, that those other values are good checks. Like, there are other ways of helping. So love for myself only is not an embodiment of equity or justice. And so for whom question pulls me to the edges, to the least of these in traditional Christian language, but pulls me to the edges away from those who currently have power. Like, that's the queering that I want to do, is the redistribution of power.
Yeah.
And that, I think that's about love too.
Yeah.
And also, there's been a whole lot of human love for humanity and disregard for the earth. So interdependence is a check on that.
Yeah.
Right. And as well as justice and equity.
Yeah. Well, it's almost, and I don't know because I think it's a great structure in the sense of love is at the center, love's the core, love's the purpose, and then you have these values that are on the external that give context of putting love at the center. Right. And altogether, they become a compass.
Right.
And the challenge often with compasses are great if you know how to use them.
Yes.
Right. And so, what have you been thinking about around even, Tobin, in terms of how we can better help people understand how these aren't just words. This is a tool.
Yeah.
This is a framework. This is a compass to use in terms of how you're moving through the world.
Yeah. So it's only been a couple of years, maybe even just one, since the final vote of that. So it's a new framework for us. So I think we're like now in the questioning, well, now how do we use this to get where we're going? We've talked a little bit before about the various supremacy cultures that we live in.
Yeah.
White supremacy. I love your way of talking about classism to call it wealth supremacy, male supremacy, heterosexual supremacy, like all these things. Tobin and I, and Tobin's our director of religious exploration, not anymore, lifelong spiritual formation, that we're making decisions now. Like, the world is spinning fast and we have to make decisions about all kinds of things. What our safety policy is, if we're going to get new solar panels for the roof, blah, 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 blah. In the absence of doing the work that you were talking about, being able to be self-reflective and do a little queering of our own supremacies that we carry around, I think we autopilot through those decisions in the way of the world.
Yeah.
And so I think the question Tobin and I are trying to ask right now is, how can we provide opportunities for people to at least raise awareness about how those systems are operative, and to maybe an invitation to queer them, to deconstruct, to subvert those systems of dominance with something more loving in really practical ways. Like, this is an extension of my question about what it means to queer church.
Yeah.
Like, this should, if we engage in this deep reflective work, try to move our center in love and move towards all these other values, it means we'll make different decisions.
Yes.
And we'll make them differently.
Yeah.
Like, the process will be different and the outcome will be different.
Yeah. Well, even when we start to talk about the systems of supremacy that we live in, and it's always like, regardless of what they are, I mean, when you look at it, it's like gender in terms of male supremacy, white supremacy, wealth supremacy, heteronormative supremacies. I mean, you can even talk about height supremacy.
Sure.
You can talk about, even just body orientation in terms of weight, right?
Absolutely.
We just named 6 of them right there. I sit at the center of every single one of those systems of supremacy. I can walk into a room, and if I choose to, I can command the room because I'm 6'4", I'm a male, I'm white, right? I can choose to do that.
And you have the confidence that comes from being socialized that way.
And there are times that I do that. And I think one of the challenges when we talk about this idea of even white supremacy is a lot of even the most well-intentioned people, when they hear that, they say, well, I'm not a white supremacist. And the idea is, we're not saying that you're a white supremacist or a wealth supremacist or a male supremacist. What we're saying is these are cultural constructs that exist, and you have to understand how you benefit and sometimes perpetuate these systems, right? And that can be hard to look at because it means I'm giving certain privileges.
Yeah.
And, when you think about, like, even within our congregation, which is I would say a lot of really good people, a very kind of progressive and liberal congregation. There's still a lot of, I think, fears there, and we've talked about this. I view fear as the opposite of love.
Yeah.
And how do you, and just even throughout your time in working in ministry, what have you kind of recognized about the fear that people hold, even like the most well-intentioned people?
Yeah. This may have echoes of what we talked about earlier a little bit. I think a big fear is, if I deconstruct that system that's benefiting me, like, I'm going to lose the comforts of my life. I mean, I think that's a bottom line fear that people have. It will cost me something. Redistributing wealth, no thank you.
Yeah.
If you're one that has it.
Yeah.
Right. So I think there's fear of loss. Maybe it's that I'll have to change my mind too. Maybe it's that, like, that back to the Jenga game. If I believe that trans girls deserve, like, this trans girl in front of me, like, really specific, this child deserves to play sports, of course, just like her brother. Some fear is, if I question that, then I might have to question all these other things that I also believe. And that means I might lose some identity that I have.
Yeah.
As a person who's always been affiliated with one particular party, or my family, I'd be at odds with my family if I do that. So there's all kinds of loss that can happen with that change.
I think, as you're talking, the root of it, and we had this when I was talking with the 6 guys earlier this week. One of the things we talked about, fear, the scarcity and abundance.
Yeah.
Love is very much an abundance mindset. Fear is scarcity, right? And so there's a sense of, like, obviously money. There's a lot of issues around money and scarcity there. And I'm starting to dive deep into people's relationships with money because it's really messed up. And I mean, I'm not trying to say I have a great relationship with money. I'm continually trying to improve it. But when you think about that sense of scarcity of if they get theirs, then I'm not going to have as much as mine. And I don't even think people are consciously doing this, I think is what is one of the challenges are, because you can also rationalize it. Well, it's like someone could be incredibly, very well off, but they don't view themselves as wealthy, because when they look at wealth, they look at the fact that how much wealth is controlled by such a small percentage of people, and those are the wealthy people, right? And I think that creates a challenge, because I tend to think that wealth supremacy is the most insidious of the supremacies, because it's most linked to power.
Mm-hmm.
And power is the reason why, there's a patriarchy, there's racism, it's putting certain people in place of power. Say when you've, and I think, one of the interesting things around money and even congregations is, like, there's a little bit of an expectation that people who work in ministry or work in churches have to live a life of poverty. Well, they're doing it for the joy of it. They're giving you so much return. Like, if you think about return on investment, right? How do we define return? Emotional return and stuff like that. So if you're getting so much fulfillment from this, it's like, shouldn't people be getting paid something that they can actually have a life where they're comfortable and they're not having to live the game of the get by, being the masters of the get by.
Yeah.
Which is someone else's words. I'm borrowing them.
Yeah. This is such a fascinating topic, because my anti-capitalist nature is just very excited by the questions that you ask on this. When I talk to people and they have that slippery slope, if we do this, then this will happen, and this will happen, and then we'll lose everything and we won't be safe. And, like, it's a spiral of fear.
Yeah.
That happens. My current strategy is to try and listen and ask more questions about where the fear is coming from.
Yeah.
And in that conversation, that's it. If you can name the fear, that's half the battle. If we want to use battle language. I don't think humans in general are great at being able to name the source of fear. I think we have a lot of generalized fear.
Mm-hmm.
And to be able to name it is the first thing in getting it, taking its control away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's even when you think about things, like, if you go back and you look at everything from gay marriage to even just the right for someone to choose their gender.
Yeah.
People, if you have conversations with people who don't believe it, well, I just think that's wrong.
Right.
Well, okay. So tell me a little more. Why? Well, that's how I was raised.
Right.
Okay. So how does that person choosing to be whatever expression of gender they want, impact you? And so it's like a lot of people will even say, will have a hard time attaching it to fear.
Mm-hmm.
And
I was thinking earlier today about, especially in the context of men, of the idea of, I was recently talking with a gay couple who they were in the military.
Yeah.
They're married now, and they were in the military during Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and how much fear there was like, oh well, I don't want to be in a locker room naked with a gay guy, and it's like, so
Yeah.
number one, it's like I was watching a show recently, and it was, I don't know if you ever watch Queer Eye on Netflix.
Yeah.
But Kharma was like, first of all, you got to understand, we don't want 99% of you because we're already dealing with it. And so it's like the whole idea of like, okay, so what if I hug a man who is gay and he's attracted to me? So what?
Right.
Is the fear that you all of a sudden might feel something that makes you uncomfortable? Is that the fear? Because if you're completely comfortable in your sexuality, it doesn't matter. Because are you uncomfortable around women who find you attractive?
Right.
And I was just thinking about that, and it's like, to me, it's like the fears that come out of these of kind of having such a strong identity of who you are and not being willing to kind of even question some of those things.
My last year of seminary, I went on a cross-cultural trip to South Africa with 20 other students. And there was a particular time where we were staying in homes at one particular area. And there were a number of female students that wouldn't share the house with me, wouldn't go to the house with me because they were afraid we might have to sleep in the same bedroom. And I'm like, please.
Yeah.
I'm a zero danger to you. But, and they were like probably heterosexual women in their 60s. I mean, and I was 30.
Yeah.
It had their fear had nothing to do with me.
Yeah.
Right? I wasn't even a factor in their fear.
Yeah.
At least nothing that was about me, maybe projections of me, but it was more this nebulous, I'm afraid like guilt by association is sometimes true, both for heterosexual and homosexual people.
Yeah.
Sometimes gay folks will be afraid to be around more flamboyant gay folks.
Yeah.
I remember I'm going on a tangent myself. I remember it used to drive me crazy in my first years as a minister of a queer church, where my queer people are like, I don't want to be by the drag queen. There was like transphobia in the queer community. And I was like, I do not understand this. And it's not that unusual for people who've been marginalized to then marginalize other people.
Yeah.
But fears were nebulous and projected.
Yeah. Yeah. When I was at the Returning Citizens Luncheon, which I've told you about, there was a speaker there, and he was talking to the audience there, which was primarily a Black audience, and basically making a very strong point that you have to, and he was using some very kind of inflammatory language to make a point that, like, don't be what did he say? Transphobic redneck. Because there has been, I've had some conversation with some marginalized groups before who are just like, if they tell me to call them a woman, it's like, no, they're a man. It's like, they are what they say they are. They are how they identify. And it's like, I have a really hard time. That can be difficult, where people have a hard time understanding it. If you want me to fight for you, you need to fight for me as well.
Yeah.
Right. And, I've heard many white gay men say that in the context of like racism. And that's the thing, because at the end of the day, it's like, we're all fighting about it against those who are and I don't like to use the word fight, because that comes from a sense of fear, but we're all kind of trying to unite and try and dismantle some of these structures that are kept in place by a few very powerful people
that hurt all of us.
Yeah. And it's like, even people who are being, we start othering, and it's like, at the end of the day, we share 99.9% of our DNA.
Yeah.
We're just not that different.
Yeah. Yes, you're absolutely right. I notice, I don't know if this is related to what you're saying or not, but it strikes me, so I'll say it. Some of the folks that I've been working with in the last few years around trans inclusion and around awareness and proficiency using what pronouns people use and neopronouns. I think a lot of the fear of the folks I'm working with, who are mostly progressive, well-intended, want to do the right kind of thing, they're afraid they're going to mess up.
Yeah.
It's white supremacy culture of perfectionism meets
Yeah.
the other. Like, it's very intersectional.
Yep. And here's the thing, you are going to mess up.
Absolutely. You must.
Yep.
You must.
And if you don't mess up, it means you're not trying hard enough.
It means you haven't learned anything.
No. It's like, how are you going to learn if you're not making mistakes, you know? And
love is like, if you know that you are loved as a human who inevitably makes mistakes, then you don't have that kind of racked anxiety about it.
Yeah.
So there's massive fear of not being loved enough. I think that's opportunity too.
Well, even as you're, talking about making mistakes and I have a mentor of mine he's more my mentor in kind of the nature connection, wilderness, outdoor space. And he's just so amazing and fascinating, because you could put him in the middle of he was on the show Naked and Afraid and survived 21 days in the Philippines jungle. And it's just like, but he's a former Marine, but he's anything than what you would expect of a former Marine. Mm-hmm. He is so gentle, so calm, so grounded, so kind of love-centered. And, he talks about wisdom as basically a collection of mistakes and failures. Like, knowledge you can get from a book, right? Wisdom is actually going out there and making mistakes and having that lived experience. And I think so much of what we talk about, and this is one thing that I've just loved about how you do your reflections in your sermons, is that, sometimes there will be, I've gone to other churches and it's all up here. It's all intellectual. It's on the head. And you live up here, but it's so much in the heart as well. It's embodied, because so many of these things we intellectually understand, but we don't bring them down into our heart. And it just becomes such an intellectual exercise.
Yeah. This is a particular challenge for Unitarian Universalists.
Yeah.
Like, I think it's the biggest, and it comes from the two sides of our history, where Unitarians were really kind of thought people like lesbian the theory, and Universalists were about rest in the love man. Like, that's an oversimplification, but they're in some tension, our Unitarian and Universalist path. And so that we've come to this new articulation, I think, is opportunity for us to do some integrating of those.
Well, I think that's beautiful. And it can be like, because I think it's so many people struggle with that. And I even think it when people talk about the liberal elite in a negative context, oftentimes that negative context is warranted.
Yeah.
Because of, and it's, it's like, at the end of the day, no one's perfect, but it's like coming off as kind of smarter than, and using language people don't understand doesn't really benefit. And it just makes people feel stupid, and people don't want to feel stupid.
No. And it doesn't really make the person saying it feel smart either.
No.
Yeah.
No. As much as they want to. So I was going to, in my last question, I always like to ask, I may frame up a little bit differently than this, but I always talk about the reason why I love to do these around a fire is I think I can get into the history of the connection around fire. And the reason why we say circle up is because we did it around a fire. We were sharing the warmth. We were sharing connection.
Yeah.
And I always ask the question of, we're tending this conversation, but we're also tending this fire as we go. And when you think about what we need to do moving forward, not only as individuals, our local communities, but globally, I always ask, what fires do we need to tend in ourselves and others? And I might frame that up a little bit of like, what do you see are the biggest things we need to wear in ourselves and others in our communities to start making for a world where more of us are leading with love, or at least asking the question, am I centering love?
Yeah. The framework that I found the most had the most to grab onto for me in the last few years in terms of tangible work, internal work, is to look at this Tim Hawkins' characteristics of white supremacy culture, individualism. I'll just use that as one thing that's pretty prevalent in American culture anyway. I want to deconstruct individualism and move towards interdependence. Like the values that we have are antidotes to something else. And those are the things I find problematic in society. So it's a really helpful. So for me, it's like, the parallel was sitting around the campfire. So much of our lives are transactional, and that doesn't really serve us as a people. And so the like sinking into relationships, sitting around the fire and allowing space to breathe and cogitate and listen and take to heart and know that there's going to be another fire the next day. Like there's a pace to this that feels more humane than our capitalist way of working right now. So I want to have more of those conversations that make the drop from head to heart and don't leave the circle when we disagree. The avoidance of conflict is another characteristic of white supremacy culture. And love tells us to turn toward one another, even when it's hard, and not reject one another. And this sounds like, preacher talk, but this is the thing that can help us abolish the current prison industrial complex. Like it's a really important work that starts really low.
Yeah.
And close.
Yeah.
Yeah. We have to be proximate.
Yeah. And as you know, the prison system and whole so-called justice system is something that I spend a lot of time thinking about and working with. And, one of the things I've been thinking about, and it's a couple weeks, I'm going to be sitting down with a friend of mine down in Virginia who spent 25 years in prison and having one of these conversations.
Yeah.
He's now doing reentry work, which is just an amazing individual. But the question I have, and it's interesting because these things come up, is Beck and I being landlords, we do background checks.
Yeah.
And it's just always what we've done. And we were just doing one recently because we're going to be doing a midterm rental on our place. And I said, I know we do these. However, we need to be very careful about rejecting someone if they have a felony.
Right.
And I think in the past, we've been always like, it's like, we don't want to have to get into that.
Yeah.
And when you actually sit down and just bear witness to someone's lived experience, you start to understand, especially when it comes to justice system, you have to ask, when did the crime actually begin?
Yeah.
Because I've come to believe that all crimes are bad. Crimes against other people, individual crimes are really, really bad. There's a part of me that's come to believe that crimes against humanity are worse, in the sense of when you have things like systemic racism, which is a crime against humanity, not just a crime against Black people, it's a crime against humanity that is causing other crimes, right? And a lot of people aren't willing to go further upstream to understand. They see that in that story and they don't think about the situation. And it's not to justify that the crime was committed. It's like, no, if someone did something and they're not in a position to be living in society, we need to find a way to help them heal.
Yeah.
The worst punishment in a prison is solitary confinement.
Right.
And we know that is probably one of the worst things that human beings can have. I don't know why I went off on that tangent.
Well, I don't know if we've talked about this yet, but at the UUA General Assembly each year, they vote on a couple of what they call congregational study/action issues. And abolition is one from the last General Assembly. So that's when Tobin and I are digging in to say, how do we have that conversation here about where current policing trends came from and how racial justice is not anywhere embedded in the system and criminal legal system. So I'm really looking forward to having those conversations. I don't know how they'll go, but it feels so vital to me that to be part of a faith that's going to let's tackle this. And we know that not everybody agrees, and we know that, make some people angry, but there's life there. And it feels so good to me because our congregation has been for the last year really diving into restorative justice with a couple of the nonprofits in Maine. And I've been engaged as a community surrogate with some people who've been rerouted to the restorative circle instead of through the prison system. And it's, those conversations really start out by telling us what else was going on for you that day.
Yeah.
It's humanizing.
Yeah.
The power of that, like, it's amazing. I already know like all the theory about why that can be a liberative experience, but the power of it, like in action, in a small group of people who are going to listen and treat you like a whole human being.
Yeah.
Like, can you imagine if that's the way we handle problems instead of judge, convict, and cut off?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm hoping, I don't know if I told you this, I'm really hoping that it's going to work out, but I get invited to take part in I have to get some clearances, but to be able to take part in a men's circle conversation within a prison.
Awesome. Here in Maine?
No, in Virginia.
In Virginia, okay.
Which I hope it works out. Obviously, there's layers of security and approvals that need to happen, but a friend of mine's trying to make it happen for some circles that he leads. But it'll be a very sobering experience, because I will be going into a context where it'll be a circle of primarily Black men who are, incarcerated and probably do not come from economic means. And so just the fact that, and this is when I talk about structural racism and some of these systems of supremacies are crimes against all humanity, is because to be able to develop a relationship with someone that they feel so comfortable to invite me into that type of sacred space is such a gift. Like to be able to make those connections. And so but these systems prevent us from being able to make those connections and being able to bear witness to people's other lived experience beyond what we know. And to me, that's what makes life worth living. And it's like,
it's a deficit. It's a deficit for all of us. Like we all need it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Racism hurts white people. Absolutely. Not as much, but it hurts us all.
Yeah. Yeah.
It keeps us fractured and divided. Yeah.
Yeah. That's the thing. And I hate to say it, it's at the end of the day, it all comes down to power. And there are certain people that benefit from keeping us fractured and keeping us disconnected. And there's an organization which I really respect, and they basically like stop punching down and punching over and start punching up. I don't always like the approach of using violence, but you know what, that works for some people. If that's what it needs to bring people into the work, to see that it's not the kind of Mexican immigrant that is taking your job.
Right.
It's different things that are going on. And
well, it's absolutely strategy to pit marginalized people against one another.
Yeah.
Let's make them fight for this while we carry this away.
Yeah. Yeah. And the whole tactic is like, no, I get it. You're not as good as us, but you're way better than them.
Right.
And that's that. But anyway, I so appreciate you taking the time to sit down and talk. This is going to be so much fun to listen back on.
Well, it was a pleasure. It always is.
Yeah. And I thank you so much for the love that you bring into our community here, and just so excited that we returned back to the church and to find such a gem of a leader there.
Oh, well, I'm so glad you're there, and you're adding so much to our community, and I can't wait to see where the overlaps will be when you return from your adventure.
Yes. Yeah.
Awesome. I predict good trouble ahead.